to happiness in marriage. The first point just is just kind of a general idea of what is the purpose of communication, and of course there's a basic purpose of communication, which is simply to give and to receive information. But with regard to how communication can enhance, increase the happiness and the joy in marriage, we would consider, looking at letter B, that we should convey information meaningfully and sincerely, doing our best to ensure proper reception. Because not every time, what I say and what I think is heard is not always what is heard. Even though I might think I've communicated it, efficiently and clearly, there are always obstacles and barriers to communication. And so we want to do our best to communicate clearly, and we want to do our best to communicate efficiently, and to do so in such a way so as to effectively give or receive information. Letter C under this same one is that communication helps each other. We help each other assist to make good and responsible decisions. We need to communicate about things that are coming up of every type of nature, whether it be some type of event, whether it be some type of financial consideration. These things need to be communicated. A work decision that we want to communicate so that we can help one another make good decisions. Nobody wants their spouse or should want their spouse to make a bad decision, because those things adversely affect not just the spouse, but affect the entire household. And so we want to communicate to help people make good decisions. But again, going back to the one before, is we want to communicate in such a way as to be heard. If we think our spouse is about to make a bad decision, that's stupid is probably not the best way to communicate that. Although it might be, why are you hiding your face? I won't even say your name because I'm streaming live. So, okay. That's dumb or that's stupid. Might communicate a disagreement with a decision that might be made, but it may not be the most effective way to communicate that. And so, again, we want to help people make good decisions. We want to help our spouses make good decisions, but we want to help them make good decisions. We want to communicate that in a way whereby it is heard. Also, looking at letter E, communicating helps us to achieve the kind of unity that results in the attitude of we without destroying the identity of you or me. Too many times marriages are viewed, and obviously marriages require two individuals. But the majority of the conversation about the marriage itself, is me or she. Or, I, if I'm communicating, it's something about I or something about she, and rather than we. And there's a picture, and I've mentioned this a number of times in completely different context. But elderships need to communicate in terms of we as opposed to terms of I or he. Because the eldership is a singular unit which is composed of multiple individuals. And so when decisions have to be made, for example, by an eldership, or a course of action needs to be pursued, then, and by the way, I think our elders do a really good job of this, is that they communicate saying we. or they say the elders, which is the same thing as saying we. And so the same thing would also apply. So, and what does that statement imply? Well, number one, it implies that there was communication that took place. There was discussion, there was deliberation, there was a decision, and the decision goes forth from a singular eldership as opposed to a singular individual. All right, the same thing would go with our marriages. Is that when decisions are made, if it's made by one, it affects both, and so you would want that decision to be viewed in terms of we, and not in terms of he or she, and so those types of things contribute to the idea of unity. All right, and so then number two, what hinders good communication in a marriage relationship? And there are a number of things that contribute to a lack of communication. One is, I wouldn't have put this first, but it certainly is true, is that overcommitment can hinder communication. Overcommitment. In other words, having too many irons in the fire, too many things going on, too many appointments to keep, too many places to be, too many people to answer to or help or whatnot. And I'm not saying that any one of these things are not good things. They can all be great things. But too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And so overcommitment can hinder communication. Because when we're overcommitted, then the primary or the majority of the communication between a husband and wife is, I've got to go, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to go here, I've got to go there, and the communication is just simply, keeping tabs on where one there's going to be, and so that's not good. That's not good. The top of page 33 speaks about the Bible challenges us to be careful how we walk, that is to live, and to make the most of our time, redeeming the time, the text says, because the days are evil. And so we have the need to walk wisely in our marriages. Walk wisely. I just had most overcommitment nowadays revolves around two things. Most overcommitment in marriage revolves around two things. Number one is work. Number two is kids. I can't think of any other situation that affects more marriages in the sense of overcommitment than work and children. Work and children. And sometimes things can come up that are either emergency or long-term situations. For example, parents might get sick and require care, and maybe they don't live close, and maybe one or the other has to go and be away for extended periods of time, and we understand those things happen. But those things are also temporary. The things that consistently cause couples to overcommit are work and children. And I'll add this. When couples are when members of a marriage, when a husband and wife, one or the other or both, are overcommitted in one or both of those ways, it separates them from one another. Okay? It separates them from one another. But it also separates them from the church.
Hey, preacher.
Sir.
That was part of my problem. I was over committed to graduates.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of work.
Yeah, you just don't go down there and run down the track.
It wasn't just, hey, I'm gonna go Saturday. It was every night or every day working on that car. And then there's a lot of times I'd be gone for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a lot of problems. It wasn't just, it was a lot of me because it was like me. So I think if a man has a hobby, that's a problem too.
Right.
Especially if you're away, I'm like, you know what I mean? And that's hard because if you don't like it, there's gonna be a problem.
You're right. Yeah, a person.
It might not be wrong to do that.
Right.
But if you put all your eggs in one basket,
Right.
what you want to do, that's just like going fishing. A lot of guys just go fishing every weekend and go hunting while their old lady sitting at home with the kids, and that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that your pursuit of your hobby was more suited for a single guy,
Yes.
or a guy who
No
wanted
doubt.
to be single.
No doubt. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No doubt. Because I got a lot of problems, man. And I really did. And I admit it, But the man's got a hobby. Y'all agree? Most men have.
You're right.
Okay.
And some hobbies work, though.
Yeah, and that's true. But mine's been my old lady for 32 years. I'm not a sweet guy.
Well, if you're out making money, it's a little different, but if you're out
Well,
for pleasure.
I mean, yes, it's just a lot of people a lot of families does more attention to their kids than their mates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem.
It is a problem.
There's no doubt about
When the kids' activities take precedent over time together as a husband and wife, you have a problem.
Because it's all about them kids.
Right.
Every time.
And by the way, it gives children the wrong idea about their status in the home,
You're right.
because the Bible teaches there is a hierarchy in the home, and for too many homes, the kids are at the top of the hierarchy rather than at the bottom of the hierarchy, which is where the Bible places them.
And then that transfers over to school when they think they're still.
That's exactly right. Those types of activities and overemphasis on these types of things not only provides a false sense of status in the home, and then it provides a false sense of status at school or in the community.
I think it gets worse.
It does.
Because when I was a young guy, living at home, I knew my place.
Mm.
But my old man would make sure I knew my place. And my mama, y'all knew my mama.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But now, it's this way, kids get to do whatever they want to at home, and then they go to school, and Ronnie can't get up to because they hurt their little baby.
Listen.
I think it's worse now, man.
Oh, there's no question. There's no question it's worse. Listen, man.
Kids are.
I played on a state championship baseball team, and I played some college baseball without ever one time having my name called out during the course of the game. Can you imagine being able to play ball without having your name introduced before the game started, or before you walk up and you get your own, you're 7 years old and you got your own walk-up music to the, to the T-ball box. Look, and I know the parents like it, but man, it's way over the top at Hamilton now. I was behind the microphone for 15 years, and now when we introduce our starting basketball lineup, all the lights go out and a light show starts and music cranks up, and it's just like, listen, I've been to NBA basketball games that really didn't have nothing on Hamilton High School basketball introductions. What does that what does that do to the psyche of a young person?
The same thing it does at home.
It focuses all the attention on that. You're the most important person, here right now, at this time and place. And it's just not healthy. It's just not healthy.
I could preach a series of sermons on that topic.
I've heard them.
Yes, you have.
And you had every right to say that to your husband, too. You had every right to complain.
She's right.
That bothered her.
Sure.
We have children that are literally going to go to jail someday because their parents won't tell them no.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I see it. They're going to go to jail someday.
Rhonda's predictive capabilities are pretty good. All starting at the 6th grade. She already.
Says it every day.
Well, every now and then we'll run through the Marion County jail
Hey,
roster.
I knew that guy.
Oh no, not I knew that guy. I knew this one was headed that way. I could have told you this 10 years ago. This one's going to be there. That one's going to be there.
That's sad.
It is sad.
There's no way. Yeah.
I'd love to see wool. I'd love to see.
I'm not going to take no.
Careful. All right, 33. Second bullet point. Undue or unkind criticism hinders communication. Criticism in a marriage relationship is a poor and ineffective way to manipulate change. By the way, the word manipulate is neither positive or negative in and of itself. It's neutral depending on how you use it. You can manipulate things to make them work better, but there's also the negative side of manipulation, which is essentially it is guilt-based coercion. Okay, so if we're talking about manipulation in that sense, yes, manipulation is a bad way. I don't think he's using it in a bad way. I think he's just saying that criticism is not a way to get things done the way that you think they would work best. Criticism destroys relationships. Sir?
You talk about criticism, like when I go with young people a lot, I work with young people.
Oh yeah.
Even on middle on up to teenagers. A lot of times, if they do something wrong or didn't do what you want them to do, they're used to being put down for it. So they sense it too. I love to sit criticize them, brag on them a little bit. Just go put your hand on the shoulder. Say something good to you. And they'll bend over backwards.
And the same works in your marriage.
Yeah. Almost 78 years, almost learning not to criticize Charlotte. I just wasted a lot of time. Really, boy, nothing wrong.
Yeah, but you know what? I was going to get to that, Buck. You hold on to that thought just for a minute, okay? If you didn't hear what he said, sometimes I just learned to keep my mouth shut and figure out it's not worth my time. All right, hold on to that thought for just a minute, because I want to get to that in just a few minutes. But and the word criticism is also generally viewed negatively because it's generally used negatively. But the word comes to critique, means to make value judgments, and so we can critique without being critical. Does that make sense? We can critique, make value judgments without being critical. Last part of that paragraph, practicing the golden rule and the principles set forth by Jesus in Matthew 7, which is the judge not text, which is directed at the Pharisees, but I believe the meaning of it, the reason it's included here is to people that are overly critical do not receive criticism very well. People that spend a lot of time criticizing others do not receive criticism well. even if it's what we would say constructive criticism. In other words, there's a mindset that leads one to be overly critical, and that is, I know better than you, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. I know better than you, and that's an attitude that engenders criticism, undue criticism, to be overly or to be hypercritical, and so unkind criticism can obviously hinders communication. Bullet point number 3. I haven't forgot you, Buck. All right. Bullet point number 3. A couple's misguided interest in material things can hinder communication. Couples struggle with contentment, and as a result, get caught in the trap of wanting more. In other words, what I have is nice, but it's not as nice as it could be. My house is nice, but it's not as big as it could be. We could talk about homes. We could talk about what we wear. We could talk about what we drive. We can talk about our toys. The things involved in our hobbies. There has to be some type of level of contentment. Now again, that's not to say that you can't work for things to enjoy. The problem would come when working for the things hinders the marriage, to acquire things that further hinder the marriage. And so we want to think about this inordinate desire for material things. I think about a couple, and they're not married anymore, but in my view, they had a lot of money, had plenty of money. Let's put that. They had plenty of money. And they were up to their eyeballs in debt, credit card debt. And they really didn't have anything to show for it except for some really nice clothes that, hung in the closet about 99 days out of 100. Nice furniture or items in the house, whatnot. There was never a sense of contentment. And it drove one of them to work more and more and more and more and more, and it just ended up destroying their marriage. And so, learning to be content is critical. And again, don't confuse the idea of contentment with trying to better yourself. The Bible never condemns trying to better yourself or your situation if you can do it in a way that doesn't harm your relationship with God or your family. The examples of, I have 5 talents, I went out and I gained 5 more. Well, that person went out and did something. He improved himself on behalf of the one who gave him his talents. And so, and I also thought about this. This can even be true. This can even be true in single income families. There aren't a ton of those. Not a ton of those. In the world anymore. But if you have a single income household, most of the time the single income is going to come from the husband. But sometimes he's got to work like a dog because his wife will not stop spending money. Wives can go a long way in fostering a household environment of contentment. A household environment of contentment. And I just ran across this. This came across I was doing some family type research, and I came across this. Almost 60% of American households cannot pay cash for a $1,000 emergency. 60% of American households do not have $1,000 on hand to cover an emergency. And about 40%, about 30 to 40% have $0 in savings that they can get their hands on. Now, the majority of Americans, if they had some type of emergency, would have to put it on credit card and pay it over time. Now listen, that's not because Americans ain't making money. You know, the American family unit has the same problem of the United States government. It's not an income problem. It's a spending problem. Our government has way more than enough money to do the things that the Constitution permits it to do. You know, we run deficits because we have a spending problem. Families run deficits because they have a spending problem, not because they have an income problem. And being in this secondary business that I'm in now with mortgage lending, I can't tell you how many people that I come across, that make a lot of money and can't get a loan for a house because they're burdened with credit card debt. We did manage to get one family financed one time, because there are certain things. For example, just to give you, you say, well, how does a family that makes a lot of money not be able to get a house? Well, the government requires you to have the ability to repay. And after the housing crash of 2008 to 2010, they put in a bunch of regulations because unscrupulous loan officers were just giving people loans without. They were called NINA loans, N-I-N-A, no income, no assets. We'll just give you the loan. We don't have to even investigate your ability to repay. And they were giving people 125% of value. Meaning if you wanted to buy a $200,000 house, they would let you borrow $250,000 on a $200,000 house. And that's why the housing market crashed. And now everybody has to show ability to repay. And they only allow you a certain amount of debt once they calculate your mortgage into it. And most of them are right around 47 to 51%. In other words, you can't have obligated debt exceeding 50% of your gross income. Obligated debt. They don't calculate what your power bill is. They don't calculate what your water bill is. They calculate what shows up on your credit report that you got to pay every single month. Every single month. And there's people make a ton of money that cannot get a loan because they are buried in debt. I remember one couple we worked with, we barely got them under the number. They had 2 car payments that were $1,100 a month each. Now what happened was they liked the house they were in, decided they were going to stay there, and then bought 2 cars and found a house that they really wanted to buy. But they made enough money to just barely slide in under the number. Can you imagine 2 $1,100 car payments? I talked to a lot of single people that want to quit paying rent. and buy a house. And the first thing is, well, I got an $800 car payment. And I'm like, unless you make a ton of money, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so a lack of contentment, hurts families in their communication, and then hurts them in a lot of other ways as well. All right, bottom of page 33. Principles a couple can apply to enhance the communication in their marital relationship. First, a couple should approach every discussion with a good and positive attitude, remembering the power of their words. Secondly, to remember that actions often speak louder than words. Third, to be active listeners. Fourth, let me stop right there for a minute. I told Buck I wasn't going to forget what he said, and I'm going to get back to it. And this is because I'm not a good communicator. For a guy that communicates for a living, I'm not a great communicator. All right. I'm like what Buck said. Sometimes just be quiet and save yourself a lot of trouble. All right. Now, that seems like good advice, doesn't it, Buck? And as a general rule, it will work in most cases. But eventually, and this doesn't just go for men, anybody in a marriage, swallowing too much eventually leads to an explosion. Swallowing too much will eventually lead to an explosion of some type. I don't mean like some type. I don't mean like it has to be some type of. I've been holding this in for 5 years, and you're fixing to get all of my pent up frustrations over the last 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But it can manifest itself in any number of ways. Any number of ways. And I'm like you, Buck. Sometimes it's just like, do I want to say something? Or do I want to enjoy the rest of my afternoon? But herein lies the problem. If you and I were better communicators, we probably could say something and say it the right way more often than we do. Because if something goes, I don't want to say uncorrected, let's say unaddressed. If something goes unaddressed, then silence only ensures that it's going to happen again. And I'm not talking about some tremendous serious matter. I just mean a failure to communicate, even over the smallest of things, ensures that aggravation is going to arise again, and that's not good. It's not healthy. It's not healthy it's not healthy for a husband. It's not healthy for a wife. No matter which side, because I'm speaking from the husband's side. Buck and I are speaking from the husband's side, but it's just as valid. It's just as valid on the other side. I know this thing goes both ways. We need to learn to be healthy communicators. Healthy communicators. The fourth one in this list says a couple needs to verify what they hear by asking questions. I've got a really good preacher friend, Mike Benson. Mike is a little bit old. Mike's a little bit older than I am. He just turned 65 in December. Mike is a really good preacher and a really good communicator, and he's a really good person to talk to. I helped Mike get the preaching job at my home. I love Mike so much, I helped him get the preaching job at my home church late last year. He's the preacher at Dexter, Missouri. Okay? That's how much I love Mike. All right? So, I cannot tell you in the at least dozens of conversations, probably more than 100 conversations he and I have had in the last year, how many times I've heard him say this. Now, what I hear you saying is, before Mike says another word, he says, now what I hear you saying is, and then he repeats his understanding of what I just said. And here's what I'm getting at. He doesn't always get it right. So, and that's not his fault, and it's not necessarily my fault. But by saying, what I hear you say is, gives the person that's speaking to me a chance to know whether or not I understand what they're trying to say to me. And if I don't understand what they're trying to say to me, to reframe it in a way that helps me to understand. Because I want to understand. Right? I want to understand. If Rhonda says something to me, I should want to understand it. By the way, ask Rhonda how many times she's heard me say, now what I hear you saying is, because if you guess 0, and yet I recognize how effective it is when Mike and I are talking, I need to use it more in our own conversations.
I know friends with separate ways, and neither one of them is guilty because of that very reason. What this one said about that one wasn't meant the way they interpreted it. But yet, instead of going back to each other and talking about it, they just, I ain't talking anymore. I mean, several times I've seen that with friends go years before
Right.
They get back together maybe.
Yeah. And all that lost time, all that lost sleep, all that lost energy over nothing. That could have been solved with what I hear you saying is. Is that the first or second? Oh man, I forgot. I didn't hear the first one. Let me turn this off. Let me get these handed out real quick. By the way,